आज की पॉडकास्ट में हम बात कर रहे हैं फेक न्यूज़ और मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन की।
And I think that anybody who is consuming news needs to understand how news is produced, and that there are people like you and me who are involved in the production of news. Those people have constraints, right? They have their own interests, they have their own biases, and so you should always think about that when you're reading something.
हम बात करेंगे कि हम खुद कैसे फेक न्यूज़ को पहचान सकते हैं।
अगर कोई चीज़ है जो आपको बहुत एक्सट्रीम इमोशंस फील करवा रही है, लाइक देयर ट्राइंग टू प्ले एट योर इमोशन, देयर नॉट ट्राइंग टू बी वेरी ऑब्जेक्टिव, देयर ट्राइंग टू क्रिएट एन इमोशन आउट ऑफ इट, आपको डरा रहे हैं या आपको इमोशनल कर रहे हैं, जस्ट द वर्डिंग ऑफ इट सीम्स वेरी पर्सनल, दैट ऑलवेज काइंड ऑफ मेक्स मी फील अ लिटिल स्केप्टिकल।
और आखिर में देखेंगे कि ओपिनियंस की लड़ाई में हम आखिर जीत कैसे सकते हैं।
टेक इन्फॉर्मेशन विद अ पिंच ऑफ सॉल्ट ऑलवेज, लाइक आज बैठ के जो शायद हम तीनों बात कर रहे हो, शायद वो इन्फॉर्मेशन कल बिल्कुल बदल जाए।
वेलकम टू अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स।
वेलकम बैक टू अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स। क्योंकि हमारे मुल्क में बहुत ज़्यादा पॉलिटिकल केओस चल रहा है एंड इट वरीज अस एज वेल, वी फेल्ट कि एक बहुत अहम कॉन्वर्सेशन की ज़रूरत है जिसको हम फैक्ट चेकिंग कहेंगे, या टू कर्ब द स्प्रेड ऑफ फेक न्यूज़ एंड मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन। अच्छी बात यह है कि ये कॉन्शियसनेस आहिस्ता आहिस्ता डेवलप हो रही है, हम इर्द गिर्द जिसके बारे में बात सुन लेते हैं, इफ नॉट ऑलवेज देन यस सम टाइम
एटलीस्ट कलेक्टिव कॉन्शियसनेस बिल्ड हो रही है कि यार जो चीज़ आपको स्पेशली सोशल मीडिया में नज़र आ रहा है ज़रूरी नहीं है कि वो सच हो। सो देयर नीड्स टू बी सम मीडिया और डिजिटल लिटरेसी रिगार्ड्स टू आप जो कंज्यूम कर रहे हो न्यूज़ वो कितनी ऑथेंटिक है।
बिल्कुल, एंड ऑफ कोर्स वी आर नॉट गोना लिमिटेड टू, जब आप फेक न्यूज़ या मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन को चैलेंज करना शुरू करते हैं, किसी भी नैरेटिव को चैलेंज करना शुरू करते हैं, वो आपके किताबों पे भी आएगा, वो आपके टीवी के कंटेंट पे भी आएगा, आपके इर्द गिर्द आपके लोग आपको क्या नैरेटिव दे रहे हैं। बट आज की जो एपिसोड है स्पेशली डेडिकेटेड टू सोशल मीडिया, बिकॉज सोशल मीडिया पे हम सबकी बहुत ज़्यादा प्रेजेंस है, इट्स अ स्पेस दैट वी वांट टू नेविगेट एज वेल, टू मेक इट अ सेफ स्पेस फॉर एवरीबडी, बिकॉज यू नो हाउ वी टॉक अबाउट सोशल मीडिया स्टार्टेड एज दिस प्लेटफॉर्म और बिकेम अ प्लेटफॉर्म इन फैक्ट जहाँ पे माइनॉरिटीज़ को वॉइस मिलती है। सो इन ऑर्डर फॉर इट टू बी एन एक्सक्लूसिव स्पेस, in order for it to have everybody's voice, there are certain standards that we need to uphold. And for this purpose, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us Mr. Sufiyan Sultan, जो कि CEO हैं सोच मीडिया के। आप इनके प्लेटफॉर्म को डिजिटल मीडिया पे यू कैन लुक इट अप, व्हाट दे डू।
We'll also put the link in the description.
डिस्क्रिप्शन में दे देंगे। डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज बनाते हैं जिसमें न्यूज़ से रिलेटेड इनका काम है, न्यूज़ एक्सप्लेनर्स होते हैं, एंड देन देर ऑल्सो इनटू फैक्ट चेकिंग व्हिच इज़ अ नाइस थिंग टू बी इनटू, बिकॉज यू नो न्यूज़ को हमारे लिए कोई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन वेरीफाई कर रही हो, उसको स्क्रूटनाइज कर रही हो, बहुत ज़रूरी है। सोच की जब हम बात सोच की ही है ना, सोच इज़ द ओनली प्लेटफॉर्म इन पाकिस्तान जो IFCN वेरीफाइड है, जिसका मतलब ये है कि इंटरनेशनल फैक्ट चेकिंग नेटवर्क का पार्ट है essentially, and also they are Facebook's fact checking partner as well. So let's dive right into the conversation. Welcome to the show, Sophia.
And if you want to fact check anything about your intro, so please do that.
So the thing is that IFCN is the International Fact Checking Network. They are a subsidiary of an organization called Pointer, which is a US-based organization. They have a bunch of verified signatories in Pakistan. We are their only verified signatory. AFP is also a signatory of theirs, but we are the only local Pakistani partner. And on that basis, we have been working with Facebook for the last 1 year as their fact check partner for Pakistan. So Facebook has a fact check program, basically, in which they worked with IFCN verified signatories to provide fact checking services on their platforms, which are Facebook and Instagram primarily. So that's kind of what we do as far as fact checking is concerned.
Okay. And Sufyan, मुझे बताएं कि आपका एक तो शौक किस तरह डेवलप हुआ, या why did you feel the need कि there is a lack of a fact checking body in Pakistan? What sort of triggered all of that?
So I think that the slightly longer journey is the reason why we started Soch is because myself and my co-founders, we thought that there were gaps in the way the mainstream media presented the news, and there were weaknesses in the way that the mainstream media kind of dealt with topics on the news, and there were a lot of ignored, subjects. And so what we thought is that trying to compete with mainstream news organizations that have tremendous amounts of advertising revenue and are backed by major conglomerates is obviously not possible. But what we can do is we can try and start a digital platform which would provide us somewhat of a corrective to the way news is reported by mainstream platforms. And so when I'm saying a corrective, we had a couple of thoughts in mind. One was that we wanted to provide news in context. We didn't want to provide kind of like news that is just in the form of sound bites or disassociated from larger contextual concerns or the history of a certain issue. So we wanted to basically provide the kind of explanatory background that is required for people to understand issues. So I mean, the rupee may be depreciating today, but there was also a period of depreciation, when Imran Khan's government came into office. And prior to that, and then there was a round of depreciation that took place when, in the last year of Musharraf's regime and the first year of the People Party regime. And so, if we want to understand the issue of depreciation, we need to take into account, the longer history of depreciation in Pakistan and Pakistan's macroeconomy in general. So we thought that, there's really no space for this on mainstream news platforms. So let's try and provide that kind of contextual information so people can better understand these public policy issues and be better informed when they're making decisions about public policy issues and so on. That was one thing. And the other is that we felt that editorial, there was too much divergence in editorial for Urdu and English papers. And we had, spoken to some people in the mainstream media, and we found that the editorializing in Urdu was often, for instance, it may be more regressive, if you want to put it that way, than editorializing in English, even though the ownership of those organizations, both the English and the Urdu platform, may be the same.
So can you just
so for example, we could say that like the Express Tribune, for instance, the Express Tribune may take a stance that is, that will be anti-Second Amendment, okay? But the Urdu Express may take a stance that may be pro-Second Amendment, right?
यानी उनकी जो approach, उनकी जो ideology, वो change ही कर देते हैं ज़बान की base.
Because not just that, I think that also happens कि at the end of the day it's a business ना, तो they want to appease to the audiences. तो वो उर्दू में वो लिख लेंगे और अंग्रेजी में, जैसे अब I also worked for a newspaper जिसमें अंग्रेजी का जो उनका stance था वो लिबरल, बहुत प्रोग्रेसिव टू द एक्सटेंट कि वो पाकिस्तान पे शायद अब उसकी प्रैक्टिकलिटी निकालना मुश्किल हो जाए कि ये किधर से आ रहा है. और जब आप उनका उर्दू का स्टांस देखेंगे तो फिर वो लगता है
completely the opposite, right? In fact, the editorial board may also be the same, but like you were saying, it's a question of what is they're trying to supply the market with what the market is demanding, right? Rather than maybe trying and thinking of journalism as kind of a civic responsibility. So there is that, right? And then the divergence between the Urdu and English editorials, and like you were saying, that some of the content in English may be, I'm not talking about, so the content in English will be progressive, but also the vocabulary used will be alienating to certain people who don't share those views, right? So we thought, let's try and come up with a unified vocabulary which will work across both English and Urdu. This is ironic because my Urdu is terrible, which is why I'm speaking in English. But there were people who were better than me at this, who were working to come up with this kind of vocabulary that would be acceptable to people across the political spectrum. And there are certain types of words, phrases, ideas that are associated with that become kind of like a site of partisanship. And I'm not saying we're completely able to avoid those things. If you have to articulate an idea, you need to use those words regardless. But the thing is that if you can avoid those words and you can convey the idea in a way that is not just virtue signaling to the choir, but also persuasive to people on the other side of the political divide, then I think that you're accomplishing something, right? So anyway, those are the ideas that we had, some of the ideas that we had when we started Soch. And because we were kind of in some form working to correct misconceptions that had been perhaps perpetuated by the mainstream media, or at least were widely accepted in Pakistan, it was kind of a natural step for us to be interested in working as a fact checker. Okay, and then we were already doing some work with Facebook, and we came to know that they did not have a fact-checking partner in Pakistan. And we then discovered that the means of becoming an official fact-checking partner was becoming IFCN verified. And so then we embarked on a very long process. It took about 18 months to become IFCN verified, which was a very interesting journey. We had to jump through a lot of hoops. And after we did that, we signed up with Facebook and we started working on their platform as a fact checker, which I can tell you more about as well. But what we do with Facebook is quite narrow. That doesn't kind of exhaust, what you can do as a fact checker, what you should do as a fact checker. But I'm just kind of explaining it, in this way.
So, I would love for you to also kind of explain, fact checking hoti kya hai? Because we have thrown around this word, but मुझे कभी-कभी लगता है कि maybe we should also have a conversation. Yeah. What entails fact checking? What is fact checking?
So there are two. Sorry, you were saying something? No. So there were two types of fact checking. Okay, one is within a news organization, you should fact check your own articles. Okay, so that means that if you're publishing something, let's say you're publishing a long form piece. Okay, now of course long form has kind of died out in Pakistan, right, with the demise of Herald and Newsline. And also I think our attention spans are not well suited to the long form format, but I hope there's a revival because it's it's a real shame. But if you're writing a long form 10,000 word article, then you're making a number of claims, right? You're making claims of fact, and those sources to a large extent need to be verified, right? Either it means that you need to have, and so when you're actually looking at the edited piece as an editor internally, all of the claims that are in that article should be backed by citations. Okay, so when we make documentaries, for example, we have like what's called a board, which is then becomes a visual board and then is subsequently edited and then becomes a documentary. So when the producers or correspondents submit the board to the editor, if they're making a claim, for example, that in 1995 the rupee was X to the dollar. I don't know why I'm giving a lot of rupee examples, but or that Mariam Nawaz said this in 2007. There'll have to be a citation, okay? And that citation will be another news source, or it could be the journalist himself having worked on that, which is a small minority of cases because you don't work on everything. And so that's internal fact checking, and that needs to be very robust, because if you don't fact check your own work, then biases will creep in anyway, but those biases should be editorial biases, not biases that impact the facts, right? And obviously it leads to kind of like, it will undermine the credibility of your platform, and you'll just be providing people with wrong information, which is a bad thing for various reasons, right? So that's internal fact checking that is required in every organization, and every organization should do it. And they need to have internal fact checkers, either formally appointed or, or not. They can be also, the correspondent can do it themselves. It can be externally fact-checked it can be fact-checked by one of their colleagues, whatever system that the organization wants to have. Then there's external fact-checking, which is that once that information is in the public domain, okay, it falls to other organizations to do due diligence on the content that is released, and to see if that kind of is factual or mistaken or deliberately misleading, or whatever. And so a lot of fact checking actually, and now let me try to distinguish two types. So I was talking about long form articles, right? The kind of fact that those articles are much more difficult to fact check. For instance, if you have a 10,000 word piece, unless there's like something like obviously wrong, like they get the GDP growth rate wrong, or they claim that Imran Khan said something that actually Winston Churchill said, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like that becomes more difficult to fact check, and then you have got to think about fact checking the article holistically. But there's lots of other content that can be very easily fact checked. For example, doctored photographs, for example, doctored videos, for example, mislabeled photographs, mislabeled videos, things, there can be captions and headlines that are deliberately misleading in order to get people to click on that content, and so on. So fact checking comprises both, when it comes to external fact checking, or it comprises both kind of like very detailed, nuanced, diligent work, and also stuff that you can just pick out on the face of it, and you can use various online tools which can tell you if an image has been manipulated, or a video.
Yeah.
आई फील कि थोड़ा सा ऑडियंस को ये भी एक्सप्लेन कर देते हैं, फॉर इंस्टेंस एज अ ले पर्सन, कॉमन पर्सन, ठीक है, जिसको नहीं हमें फैक्ट चेकिंग की कहाँ कोई ट्रेनिंग वगैरह भी नहीं होती, ना बात की जाती है, हमें तो सवाल करना भी नहीं सिखाया गया ना एसेंशली. सो अगर सुफियान हम लोगों को बता सकें कि आप अपना फ़ोन की बात कर लेते हैं, बिकॉज हमारी जनरेशन फ़ोन ही इस्तेमाल करी होती है, टीवी वाला रिवाज पता नहीं कितना है, बट अगर फ़ोन इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, व्हाट आर सम ऑफ द थिंग्स दैट स्टैंड आउट फॉर यू, एंड वी कैन ऑल्सो शेयर कि लाइक किस तरह की इन्फॉर्मेशन हमें थोड़ा सा होती है कि वी नीड टू चेक it and then like how are we personally on our own trying to assess के content को किस तरीके से fact check करना है.
because of fact check से वो fake news की term और disinformation की हमें लगता है यार इसमें कुछ गड़बड़ लग रही है. So yeah, like just like off your like बहुत simple कुछ चीजें जो as a viewer हम adapt कर सकते हैं अपनी.
So I think that's a really complex question, right? Because that's a really complex question.
जो अभी ज़हन में आता है,
a number of things come to mind. So first of all, look, there are challenges in, if I said that everything that you see on WhatsApp or on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter, right, needs to align with what the BBC says or what Dawn says, because in Pakistan, Dawn is kind of the BBC, right? Then that would obviously exclude a lot of very valuable information, right, and perspectives, right? That would be an oversimplification. We also need to, like, we were talking about this before the podcast, how is knowledge produced? How is knowledge authorized? How is, knowledge, how is certain types of knowledge considered to have power versus other forms of knowledge are disempowered, or perspectives are disempowered or disregarded? But I think the thing is that, so you can't just say that if it doesn't line up with what Dawn is saying, what the BBC is saying, what Geo is saying, what Airwai is saying, it's wrong, right? So I think let's try and pick up a few different like examples, right? I think that, first of all, I think that as a consumer of news, in a world where there's so much production of news content, and in which we understand kind of like the commercial imperatives behind the production of news content, your consumption of news should always be skeptical, right? I think to start with. Then the thing is that, and you should be skeptical even when watching the mainstream news, and maybe particularly when watching the mainstream news, right?
More so.
And I think that anybody who is consuming news needs to understand how news is produced, right? And that there are people like you and me who are involved in the production of news, and those people have constraints, they have incentive structures, right? They have their own interests, they have their own biases, and so you should always think about that when you're reading something, right? Other than that, I think that when it comes to, if you're looking at images and videos, right, I think that it's important in today's day and age to have the ability. Now, again, it's difficult to say this. I'm trying to think of how to qualify this statement. In a world in which you have deep fakes, in a world in which you have, very sophisticated editing processes, in which, photos can be manipulated.
It could be very difficult.
It can be very difficult.
Very, very difficult.
It can be very difficult. But I mean, if a PTI crowd happens to look like the, France at night from space, then I mean, I'm just trying to say that again, like that. How can a layperson tell that is not a PTI crowd, right? Do they have to be aware of the borders of France? Do they have to know how satellite photography takes place? When we were kids, and even now, I think there are a lot of people who believe that you can see the Great Wall of China from space.
Yeah.
In fact,
I believed it till I was an adult, till I found out कि नहीं ऐसी बात नहीं है.
So this is something that you'll probably find a lot of, if you look at those, wide world of fact type books, which were published in the 80s or 90s or earlier or whatever, which are you'll still find at bookstores today, they'll probably say that you can see the Great Wall of China from space, right? Which is not true. It's impossible, right? For that to be the case. So what I'm trying to say is that, so how would you know that? You have to know a lot of contextual information around it. But having said that, you can tell, again, certain things. You have to think about causation. right? I mean, again, these are like spills over into like just general civic, generally being aware of contextual information, being aware of kind of like legal information, having a good education, whatever a good education means. So it's difficult for me to answer this question, but I think that, like, you can say that there are telltale signs if the grammar in a piece isn't well written. So if a piece is
कुछ बहुत ही बेसिक चीज़ें तो like हैं जो हम देख सकते हैं. और like for example मेरे लिए हमेशा एक चीज़ होती थी that I've also kind of I made like some content about disinformation for this platform a while back. तो उसमें ये थी कि अगर कोई चीज़ है जो आपको बहुत extreme emotions feel करवा रही है, like they're trying to play at your emotion, they're not trying to be very objective, they're trying to create an emotion out of you. आपको डरा रहे हैं या आपको emotional कर रहे हैं, just the wording of it seems very personal. That also always kind of makes me feel a little skeptical कि यार यहाँ कुछ और लग रहा है मुझे कि इतना क्यों emotional बहुत मेरे अंदर से कोई चीज़ निकाली जा रही है. So that's also something that I kind of learned to kind of look out for very much in my personal life. But I understand it's a very difficult question. And
I'm laughing about this because you see इसमें दो चीज़ें हैं, right? So now the algorithm of these online, we have to, so the way online or the way social media organizations work.
बात कर लेते हैं जो algorithms हैं.
So I mean, I just want to say two things about this quickly, and then we'll go into the algorithm. One is that social media corporations obviously want more time, you to spend more time on the platform, so they can sell you more advertising, so they can make more money, and that's their primary concern. Okay, and they know that in order to get you to spend more time on the platform, they need to have content that is inciting, arousing, sensational, and that is why, misleading content often has those characteristics, and therefore misleading content spreads more quickly on the platform than other forms of content. Now, the disclaimer I wanted to put here is that if the New York Times article says that the Al Jazeera journalist Shireen died, rather than she was killed, and it'll be written as beautifully as a New York Times article is written and edited as well as a New York Times article is edited, which is way above what any organization in Pakistan can do, and is considered to be
the top
the best journalism in the world. That's still misinformation, right?
उनकी भी biases
so
हैं.
उनके भी biases हैं.
Yeah.
Those biases are structural, those biases are deep, those biases are persistent. So that's the disclaimer that I wanted to make. But everything else that you were saying about something that tries to incite you, something that is sensational, all of that, is a sign that the content is maybe fake. But to a large extent, we're drowning in information, and you need people who are. And investigative journalism is something that is very underfunded in Pakistan, and you need investigative journalists or investigative journalism skills in order to sort the fact from the fiction, right? Sorry, you were asking me something.
Can I go? Okay. क्या कहते हैं मैं बस वही शेयर करना चाह रही थी अपना एक्सपीरियंस भी विद फैक्ट चेकिंग. आई फील लाइक थोड़ी सी जो चीज़ें हम करते हैं या जो मैं अपने लिए करती हूँ एटलीस्ट, के कभी कभी होता है खबरों पे या सोशल मीडिया पे आप देखते हैं कि किसी के इंटरव्यू का, किसी की बात का छोटा सा क्लिप लगा देंगे, एंड देन उसके ऊपर बहुत सारा तबसरा भी होगा. उस केस में कोशिश करें कि जाएं, पहले पूरा इंटरव्यू देख लें, पूरी बात सुन लें और फिर अपना ओपिनियन फॉर्म करें कि वो है क्या. एंड ऑल्सो लाइक whenever you come across a news, I know कि हम emotional इंसान हैं, emotions हमारे बहुत inherent, it is an inherent part of us, but give yourself 5-10 minutes or 15 or half an hour, but like just so that you can sort of rationalize कुछ भी उसमें से and then give an opinion about something. Know कि gatekeeping is a very essential part of media. जो भी हमारे पास information आती है, आज तक जो हमने किताबों में भी पढ़ा है, वो सारा कुछ किसी के interest में था तो आया है, वरना हमें भी पता है इतने ज़्यादा narratives हैं growing up जो नहीं आते हैं. ख़वातीन के हवाले से narratives missing है. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता. I refuse to believe कि हमारी ह्यूमन हिस्ट्री में जो सारी ख़वातीन रही हैं उन्होंने सिर्फ होम मेकर्स के ही किरदार अदा किए हैं,
सपोर्टिव वाइफ और सपोर्टिव बहन का किरदार अदा किया है.
बिल्कुल उनकी कोई पॉलिटिकल इंक्लिनेशंस नहीं थी या वो तलवार नहीं उठा सकती थी, ऐसा पॉसिबल नहीं है. आई डोंट थिंक सो. ऑल्सो क्या कहते हैं, आई फील के टेक इन्फॉर्मेशन विद अ पिंच ऑफ सॉल्ट ऑलवेज. लाइक आज बैठ के जो शायद हम तीनों बात कर रहे हो
उसको भी क्वेश्चन करो,
नॉट जस्ट क्वेश्चन करो, रिमेंबर कि शायद वो इन्फॉर्मेशन कल बिल्कुल बदल जाए. तो इंस्टेड ऑफ गेटिंग वेरी हेटफुल टूवर्ड समबडी और लाइक ट्राइंग टू रिप ऑफ द अदर पर्सनस हेड बिकॉज आपके पास आज इन्फॉर्मेशन है, रिकग्नाइज कि कल वो बदल सकती है और वो बदलेगी, तो दैट्स हाउ वी नीड टू चेंज आवरसेल्व्स एज वेल. वो बहुत ज़रूरी है. एंड अगेन आई फील लाइक कि थोड़ी सी नहीं, काफ़ी ज़्यादा जिम्मेदारी हमारे इदारों की है जो लोगों में जब इंफॉर्मेशन को प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं, होल्ड देम अकाउंटेबल, बिकॉज यू नो जर्नलिज्म का जो सारा प्रोफेशन बढ़ा था या चला था या इमर्ज किया था वाज देम प्रोजेक्टिंग देमसेल्व्स एज द वॉचडॉग ऑफ द पीपल. सो एक्सपेक्ट देम टू डू देयर जॉब्स, होल्ड देम अकाउंटेबल व्हेन दे डोंट. आज भी मैं देखती हूँ कि आई एम सॉरी आई एम ब्रिंगिंग दिस अप, बट बॉम्ब ब्लास्ट होता है और हमारे इदारे या मीडिया के इदारे उसकी पूरी फुटेज चला देंगे, ठीक है, विद नो सेंस ऑफ सेंसिटिविटी. मतलब इफ़ यू क्लेम टू बी द वॉचडॉग फॉर द पीपल, यू शुड बी द मोस्ट सेंसिटिव वंस आउट देयर. इफ़ यू आर नॉट डूइंग इट, इफ़ पीपल अराउंड यू, इफ़ मीडिया हाउसेज आर नॉट डूइंग इट, तो उसको थोड़ा सा चैलेंज ज़रूर.
So, you know, a lot of what you're saying is, I think, 100% correct. And when you're saying that when you read something, you should take a couple of minutes and reflect and see, does this fit into like kind of, you know, context that you might know to be true or know better to be true. And you have to hold, you know, government and state institutions responsible because they're also responsible for a lot of misinformation, right? Whether it means statistical manipulation or many other things. But you know, and you've got to recognize, like you were talking about journalism ethics, right? And standards when you're talking about showing, for example, victims in a bomb blast. And the reason why you see victims in a bomb blast is because people know that more people will turn on the television if they see bomb blast victims. So when that happens, they trample over people's right to privacy. You know, grieving families are kind of like, you know, exposed at their most vulnerable. And it's really terrible. But each person who's there on the side, each media person there on the side is doing it because they think everybody else will do it, right? So a lot of self-regulation is required, and people need to take a step back and say that, you know, even if I could benefit or profit from this, I'm not going to do it. So when we embarked first on this kind of journey of becoming IFCN verified signatories, myself and some of my colleagues went to Singapore for a journalism workshop. Okay, and this was in December 2019. So you know, right before the COVID pandemic, right? So what we went through, we did one kind of like exercise in which we were told that so we're grouped, we're like sitting on these tables like this, for example. Not for example, we actually were. It's misuse of the word example. We were sitting on tables like this, and there were a bunch of us, and we were supposed to play different roles in kind of the media landscape, right? And we were told that, so we were then given some news, and we were asked, how do you report this? And then there would be a follow-up story, and a follow-up story, and a follow-up story, right? And how do you report this responsibly and factually and, you know, whatever, ethically? And the story that we were given actually was that so there's no MMR vaccine in Singapore, or there wasn't after a certain point. There used to be MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella. And 3 people or 4 people, I don't remember exactly, are found to have taken a flight to Singapore from, I think, the Fiji Islands or something, and they are found to have measles, which is one of the most, you know, virulently infectious diseases in the world. Okay? And then there are a series of kind of bulletins or a series of kind of you know, pieces of information that you're given, and you're asked, how do you report this? And anyway, even though this was just an exercise, right? Even though you were just sitting in a room, you know, with a bunch of other journalists trying to learn about journalism, everybody kind of became seemed to be pushed towards or driven towards reporting that in as sensational terms as possible. Right? And at the end of the exercise, you know, a lot of people who had just spent the last couple of days like learning about responsible journalism had behaved quite irresponsibly in the way they were kind of like, you know, reporting on that. You had to type stuff out and then, you know, talk to other, you know, basically get on a mic and say that this is how we're reporting it or whatever. And you know, people were failing that exercise, and we were told that, you know, the reason for this is that the fear of disease is like a fundamental, primordial human instinct, right? And so exercises are often conducted, journalism exercises are often conducted in which kind of like you know, you have to kind of like war game pandemic or epidemic conditions.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So you have to like, basically, if you want to see how good a journalist is, this is what we were told, and it makes sense, at reporting responsibly, right? and truthfully, and not creating mass hysteria and panic. You test them by giving them a scenario of a pandemic. Okay.
Things that will scare the shit out of them, basically.
Yes, exactly.
To see how
right?
emotional they can get, or how much objective they will remain.
Exactly. Yeah. And you see that there was also, and just a couple of months later, the COVID pandemic broke out, and I think it became a real crisis point for journalism throughout the world, right? In many different ways, and I think that the way in which COVID was reported upon, I think regardless of whether you're on the right or the left, and the fact that the COVID pandemic became so politicized, right?
Like wearing a mask became so political.
So it was unbelievable, right? That like you could predict whether someone would wear a mask on the basis of whether they were going to vote for Trump or Biden, right? I think that the media globally kind of failed in their responsibilities to responsibly report on the pandemic. And I've completely lost track of what I was trying to answer.
But I'll tell you. Podcasts are about, Sufiyan. It's perfectly okay. Everything you're saying has a lot of value. And pata, like even I'm about to lose a little track because abhi hum सारी बातें कर रहे हैं. मुझे लग रहा है कि how can we even have a conversation about fact check and truth and objectivity, subjectivity without also kind of looking at media itself.
जी बिल्कुल.
And like वो कितना कोई role of media itself क्या है, especially like Pakistan के context में. So maybe we can kind of, I mean आप दोनों ज़्यादा journalist background के हैं, तो maybe we can come up with a better question that could be like
नहीं आई फील कि इसी को लेके चलते हैं. आई फील लाइक कि एक चीज़ जो बहुत ज़रूरी है, जैसे सुफियान ने कहा, आई फील लाइक आई रिमेंबर्ड कि मैं एक वर्कशॉप अटेंड करी थी और उसमें इसी तरह की एक एक्सरसाइज क्या कहते हैं कराई गई जिसमें रिपोर्टिंग की बात है. आई फील लाइक दिस इटसेल्फ इज़ सच अ नाइस एक्सरसाइज कि आप लोगों को इकट्ठा करो और जर्नलिस्ट को एसेंशली जो रिपोर्टिंग करना चाहते हैं और उनको सिनेरियोज दो और उनको बताओ कि कैसे रिपोर्ट करोगे. बिकॉज लॉट ऑफ द टाइम्स इन थ्योरी तो लोग सुन लेते हैं चलते फिरते, बट व्हेन यू एक्चुअली हैव टू सिट डाउन राइट अ हेडलाइन, तो देन यू रियलाइज कि उसका इम्पैक्ट क्या हो सकता है. जी. और दूसरी एक्सरसाइज जो बहुत ज़रूरी है और जो आई थिंक जर्नलिस्ट के साथ बहुत करना ज़रूरी है, और अगर आप अपने इदारों में शुरू कर दो, जो पढ़ रहे हैं एसेंशली बच्चे, स्पेशली जो जर्नलिज्म पढ़ रहे हैं उनको सिखाओ, वो ये है कि आपने ऑब्जेक्टिव कैसे रहना है. मतलब आई एज अ पर्सन हैव अ लॉट ऑफ बायसेस, ऑफ कोर्स आई एम अ ह्यूमन बीइंग, ठीक है. जब मैं अपने लिए या अपने दोस्तों से पर्सनली बात करूँगी तो मैं ऐसी बात कर लूँगी कि मुझे पता है सेफ स्पेस है. बट जब मैंने रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ले ली है ऑफ बीइंग अ जर्नलिस्ट एंड वर्किंग फॉर अ प्लेटफॉर्म, देन ऑल ऑफ माई बायसेस स्टे होम. देन आई रिपोर्ट कि अच्छा ये फैक्ट इधर ये ऐसे हुआ है, ये चीज़ ऐसे हुई है. और मेरा तो ये भी ख्याल है कि एक जर्नलिस्ट की जिम्मेदारी ये है कि वो सिर्फ इन्फॉर्मेशन दें इंसानों को. आप लोगों को डिक्टेट करना छोड़ दें कि लोगों ने किस पीस ऑफ इन्फॉर्मेशन पे ज़्यादा जोर देना है, किस पीस ऑफ इन्फॉर्मेशन पे कम जोर देना है, उसमें से आपने ओपिनियन क्या अखज़ करना है. मेरा काम ये है, मैं आपको बताऊंगी कि ये चीज़ें हुई हैं. अगर उसमें थोड़ी सी एक्स्ट्रा वो डालनी है तो ये बता सकती हूँ कि इस इंसान ने ये कहा, इस इन्फ्लुएंसर का ये ओपिनियन है, इस पॉलिटिशियन का ये ओपिनियन है. बट आई स्टिल फील कि द राइट of having an opinion or forming an opinion should stay with the public. वो आप नहीं लोगों से छीने. हाँ, जब आपने अपना ओपिनियन बताना है तो लोगों को बताएं कि ये सिर्फ मेरा ओपिनियन है. You don't have to believe any of it. You go home, you check every word that I have said even, और फिर आप अपनी राय कायम करें.
At least like put that tag on it, ताकि जब बंदा पढ़ रहा उसको पता है कि ये इन्फॉर्मेशन आप दे रहे हो मुझे ऑब्जेक्टिवली, जितना भी ऑब्जेक्टिवली आप कुछ दे सकते हो मुझे, एंड ये आपका ओपिनियन है, ये आपका इन्फॉर्म्ड ओपिनियन है. चलो ये भी कह दो कि कुछ लोगों के some opinions might be more informed than others and you might be inclined to listen to those opinions because you want to listen to those opinions to form your own opinion. Everyone has the right to do that, but then the categorization needs to be pretty clear cut.
And also I feel कि थोड़ी सी जिम्मेदारी लोगों को खुद भी लेनी पड़ेगी क्योंकि किसी और पे ना डाल दें अपनी थिंकिंग कैपेसिटी या कि आपके लिए कोई और सोच दे. बिकॉज आई नो इट्स कन्वीनियंट कि कोई और सोच रहा है, और इन्फ्लुएंसर मार्केट जो सारी है वो यही है एसेंशली कि मैं जिसको फॉलो करता हूँ और द पर्सन दैट आई लुक अप टू वो ये ओपिनियन दे रहा है तो या दे रही है तो मैं भी ये करूँगा. ऐसे ना करें. अपना जो ज़िंदगी में इख्तियार है ना, योर पावर टू हैव योर ओन ओपिनियंस, डोंट लेट दैट गो. एंड इवन इफ लाइक ये थोड़ी सी मुझे लोगों में ये भी बात होती है कि अनलेस एंड अनटिल आई हैव एन ओपिनियन, अनलेस एंड अनटिल 2-3 लोग उसको मतलब वैलिडेट नहीं करेंगे तो मैं अपने आप को डाउट करने लग जाऊंगी कि ये क्या हो रहा है. डोंट डू दैट टू योर सेल्फ. इट इज़ ओके, परफेक्टली फाइन इफ़ यू आर द ओनली पर्सन विद दैट ओपिनियन. खैर है, कोई मसला नहीं है.
अगर आपको ये एपिसोड पसंद आई है तो प्लीज़ लाइक करें, शेयर करें, कमेंट्स में अपना ओपिनियन बताएं और माटी टीवी को सब्सक्राइब करें.